Hello, my dear students of magic. It's Demian. Welcome back to the dormitory for another evening of shared parchment, ancient tales, and peaceful rest. Today we are diving into the life of one of the most complex and enigmatic figures in wizarding history. A man who stood as both savior and manipulator, hero and strategist. A grandfather figure who hid centuries of secrets behind twinkling half-moon spectacles. We are exploring the hidden depths of Albus Percival, Wulfric Brian Dumbledore, the Headmaster of Hogwarts, the defeater of Grindelwald, and perhaps the most brilliant wizard of his age. But tonight, as you settle in and let the story wash over you, we will peel back the layers of carefully constructed legend to reveal the troubled soul beneath. A man whose brother once said grew up with secrets and lies, and who was perhaps a natural at both. Let your mind drift back to a simpler time, to the summer of 1881, when the wizarding world was a quieter place. In that year, a baby boy was born to Percival and Kendra Dumbledore, a child they named Albus. For his first years, the Dumbledore family lived peacefully in the village of Mold on the Wold, a place where magic and mundane life intertwined quietly. Little Albus was brilliant from the start, showing signs of extraordinary magical talent even as a toddler. His parents adored him, and soon he was joined by a younger brother, Aberforth, and then a precious little sister named Ariana. The three Dumbledore children grew together in those early years, and by all accounts, their childhood was filled with warmth and love. But fate has a way of shattering peace without warning. And for the Dumbledore family, that shattering came when Albus was around 8 or 9 years old. Little Ariana, just 6 years old, was playing in the back garden of their home one afternoon, practicing the accidental magic that comes naturally to young witches and wizards. She was alone, or so she thought, conjuring small lights or perhaps levitating flowers, the innocent magic of childhood wonder. But 3 muggle boys from the village were spying through the hedge, and they saw everything. They watched this little girl perform what they could only perceive as terrifying witchcraft, and fear quickly turned to aggression. The boys forced their way into the garden, demanding that Ariana show them how she did her tricks. When the frightened 6-year-old could not perform on command, when her magic wouldn't cooperate with her rising panic, the boys became violent. They attacked her, trying to stop what they saw as evil sorcery, trying to beat the magic out of this child they now saw as a freak. The assault left Ariana physically and emotionally shattered. The trauma ran so deep that it fundamentally broke something inside her. Her magic, which should have been a source of joy and wonder, became a source of terror. From that day forward, Ariana refused to use her magic, suppressing it with all her might out of fear of what might happen if she let it out again. But magic, especially in someone so young, cannot simply be bottled up and forgotten. It festered inside her, building pressure, turning inward and poisoning her from within. Her magic would explode out of her in uncontrollable bursts when she became distressed or frightened. Dangerous eruptions that she had no ability to manage or prevent. In modern magical medical terms, what the Dumbledore family witnessed was likely the development of an obscurus, a dark parasitic force created when a young wizard or witch suppresses their magic out of trauma or fear. Ariana had become what would later be called an obscurial, though the family had no name for her condition at the time. only the heartbreaking reality that their daughter was now unstable and dangerous. Percival Dumbledore, upon learning what those Muggle boys had done to his daughter, was consumed by a rage that overrode all reason. He hunted down the three boys and attacked them with magic, cursing them in vengeance for what they had done to Ariana. The Ministry of Magic arrested him swiftly, and Percival found himself facing a trial for attacking Muggle children. But here is where the first great secret of the Dumbledore family was born. Percival never defended himself. He never explained why he had done what he did. He stood silent before the Wizigamot, accepting condemnation rather than revealing the truth about Ariana's attack and her subsequent magical instability. He knew that if the Ministry discovered what had happened to Ariana, if they learned that she was now a barely controlled magical time bomb who could breach the statute of secrecy at any moment, they would take her away. She would be locked up in St. Mungo's Hospital for magical maladies and injuries, confined to a ward for the dangerously unstable. And he could not bear that fate for his little girl. So Percival Dumbledore chose silence. He chose to be seen as a violent anti-Muggle extremist, a man who attacks children without provocation, rather than expose his daughter to institutional imprisonment. He was sentenced to life in Azkaban prison, where he would eventually die, taking the true reason for his crime to his grave. To the outside world, Percival was a monster. To his family, he was a father who sacrificed everything to protect his child. Young Albus, barely 10 years old, learned his first profound lesson about the weight of secrets. He learned that sometimes the truth is a luxury that must be abandoned to protect the people you love. He learned that the world will judge you based on what they see, not on the hidden context that drives your choices. These lessons would shape the rest of his very long life. After Percival's imprisonment, Kendra Dumbledore made the difficult decision to move the family away from Mold on the Wold, away from the whispers and the stares and the judgment. They relocated to Godric's Hollow, a village famous in wizarding history as the birthplace of Godric Gryffindor himself. Here, Kendra hoped they could start fresh, but the fresh start came with a price. Ariana's condition required absolute secrecy. Kendra became terrified of anyone discovering the truth, and so she kept Ariana hidden away inside their home. The windows were often shuttered, social visits were declined, and the family retreated into isolation. Many of their neighbors never even knew the Dumbledores had a daughter. Rumors began to circulate. Some whispered that Ariana was a squib, a non-magical person born to a wizarding family, and that Kendra was ashamed. Others suggested Kendra was cruel, keeping the girl locked up out of meanness. But none knew the truth, that Kendra was simply a mother desperately trying to protect her volatile, traumatized daughter from a world that would not understand. Albus and Aberforth grew up in this atmosphere of enforced secrecy, learning to smile and deflect questions, learning to hide the truth behind pleasant lies and carefully constructed facades. For Albus, who was naturally brilliant and charismatic, this became second nature. When he went off to Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, he dazzled everyone. He was sorted into Gryffindor House, and from his very first year he proved to be one of the most talented students the school had ever seen. He excelled in every subject, from transfiguration to charms, from defense against the dark arts to ancient runes. His professors spoke of him in awed tones. He won the prestigious Barnabas Finkley Prize for exceptional spellcasting. He was named head boy in his final year. He corresponded with noted magical theorists and historians, impressing them with his insights. By the time he left Hogwarts, Albus Dumbledore was widely regarded as the most brilliant young wizard of his generation. But even as he collected accolades and achievements, even as he built a reputation as a golden boy of wizarding academia, Albus never spoke of his family situation. He never mentioned Ariana, never explained why his father was in Azkaban, never corrected the ugly rumors that circulated about Percival Dumbledore being a muggle-hating fanatic. He had learned his lessons well. He compartmentalized his life with surgical precision, presenting a charming, slightly eccentric exterior while keeping his deepest truths locked away. At school, he was the brilliant scholar with a bright future. At home, during the summers, he was a young man trapped in a cage of family obligation, watching over a sister whose magic could explode at any moment, helping his mother bear a burden too heavy for words. As Albus approached the end of his time at Hogwarts, he began to dream of freedom. He had spent so many years being the dutiful son, the responsible older brother, and now he was 18 years old with the whole world before him. He planned a grand tour of the world with his friend Elphias Doge, intending to visit magical communities across Europe and beyond, to make his mark on the world, to begin the glorious career everyone expected of him. He was ready to step out of the shadows into the light of his own destiny. But then, in the final weeks before his graduation, tragedy struck again. Ariana, now 14 years old, had one of her uncontrollable magical outbursts. Perhaps she was distressed. Perhaps she was simply unable to hold the magic in any longer. Whatever the cause, her magic erupted in a violent explosion. Kendra Dumbledore was struck by the blast and killed instantly. Just like that, on an ordinary day, the matriarch of the Dumbledore family was gone. There was no warning, no chance to say goodbye, just sudden, shocking death. For 18-year-old Albus, the news was devastating on every level. His mother was dead, killed by the very condition the family had sacrificed everything to hide. His dreams of travel and glory evaporated in an instant. As the oldest sibling, as the only adult in the household now, responsibility fell to him like a crushing weight. Aberforth was still at Hogwarts, unable to help full-time. Ariana needed constant supervision, constant care, and now there was no one else to provide it. Albus had to cancel his grand tour. He had to return to Godric's Hollow, to that house of secrets and sorrow, to become his sister's full-time caretaker. He later admitted, decades afterward, that he felt bitter and resentful during this time. He said he was gifted, he was brilliant, and he wanted to escape. He wanted glory. When his mother died and he was left with the responsibility of a damaged sister and what he considered a wayward brother, he returned to his village in anger and bitterness, feeling trapped and wasted. These are his own words, spoken with the shame of hindsight. He loved Ariana deeply, there was never any doubt of that, but he also resented the circumstances that had chained him to this quiet village when he was meant for so much more. He was a young man of extraordinary talent watching his potential wither away while he played nursemaid and housekeeper. Pride warred with duty, ambition wrestled with love. And in this state of inner turmoil and outer isolation, Albus Dumbledore was uniquely vulnerable when a stranger arrived in Godric's Hollow, that summer of 1899. His name was Gellert Grindelwald, and he would change the course of Albus Dumbledore's life forever. Grindelwald was the same age as Albus, 18 years old, and he had just been expelled from Durmstrang Institute, one of Europe's most prestigious magical schools. He had been kicked out for conducting twisted experiments, for pushing his magical research in dark and dangerous directions that even Durmstrang, which had a more permissive attitude toward the dark arts than most schools, could not tolerate. After his expulsion, Grindelwald had come to stay with his great-aunt, Bathilda Bagshot, the famous magical historian who lived in Godric's Hollow. Bathilda, recognizing that her brilliant young great-nephew might benefit from intellectual companionship, and knowing that Albus Dumbledore was equally brilliant and isolated. In the village introduced the two young men, the connection was instantaneous and electric. Here were two of the most talented young wizards of their age, each restless, each brilliant, each hungry for greatness. They became inseparable almost immediately. They spent long hours in deep conversation, sharing their theories and philosophies, challenging each other intellectually, pushing each other to greater heights of magical thought. For Albus, who had felt so trapped and alone, Gellert's arrival was like a burst of sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Here was someone who understood him, someone who matched him, someone who saw the world the way he did. But it was more than intellectual companionship. Albus Dumbledore fell in love with Gellert Grindelwald. This is now confirmed as part of the official history, acknowledged by those who have studied Dumbledore's life most closely. In the haze of that golden summer, with his heart and mind both engaged fully for the first time, Albus's judgment became clouded. His feelings for Gellert made him blind to warning signs, made him more willing to entertain ideas he might have otherwise questioned, made him ignore the darker currents in Grindelwald's philosophy. And oh, what philosophies they developed together during those weeks. Both young men had suffered because of Muggle fear and ignorance. Albus's entire family had been destroyed by what 3 Muggle boys had done to Ariana. Grindelwald had his own grievances against non-magical people. Together, they began to construct a revolutionary ideology. They believed that the International Statute of Secrecy, the law that forced wizards to hide from Muggles, was wrong. They argued that wizards were superior beings, more powerful, more evolved, and that it was unnatural for them to cower in the shadows. They envisioned a world where wizards would emerge from hiding and take their rightful place as the ruling class over Muggle society. But they told themselves it would be benevolent rule, enlightened dictatorship. They adopted the motto for the greater good, convincing themselves that their dominance would actually benefit everyone, wizards and Muggles alike. No more would magical children be attacked by ignorant Muggles. No more would wizarding families have to hide. They would create a better world, a safer world, by simply seizing control of it. For Albus specifically, this ideology was deeply personal. If wizards ruled openly, Ariana would never have to be hidden. She would not be a secret shame locked in a cellar. She would be a member of the ruling magical class, accepted, protected. He convinced himself that their revolution would be an act of liberation for his sister, for his family, for all of wizardkind. To achieve their grand vision, they became obsessed with the Deathly Hallows, 3 legendary magical artifacts that, according to an old fairy tale, would make the person who possessed all three the master of death itself. The three Hallows were the Elder Wand, the most powerful wand ever created, unbeatable in a duel. The Resurrection Stone, which could call back shades of the dead, and the Cloak of Invisibility, which could hide the wearer from death himself. For Grindelwald, the Hallows represented raw power, the tools they would need to conquer and rule. For Albus, the Hallows held a more emotional appeal. With the Resurrection Stone, he could bring back his parents. He could resurrect his mother and father, restore his broken family, undo the tragedies that had destroyed his childhood. He could apologize to his mother for resenting his duties. He could tell his father that he understood why Percival had made the choices he made. The stone offered the possibility of healing all his old wounds, and he desperately wanted that. During those long summer days and warm evenings, Albus and Gellert plotted their revolution in detail. They researched the Hallows, trying to determine where each might be found. They discussed strategy, logistics, the magical and political challenges they would face. They convinced themselves that their superior intelligence and power justified their plans, that the ends would justify whatever means were necessary. It is now known that during this period, they even made a blood pact, a magical vow sealed with drops of their intermingled blood. This pact created an enchantment that would prevent them from ever directly fighting each other. A promise born of their intense bond, whether that bond was love, or shared ambition, or some tangled combination of both. But reality has a way of intruding on even the most carefully constructed dreams. While Albus and Gellert schemed about conquering the world and finding legendary artifacts, Ariana was still upstairs in that house, still volatile, still requiring care that Albus was increasingly neglecting. Aberforth Dumbledore, the more practical and grounded of the two brothers, watched Albus's new friendship with growing alarm. He saw his brother becoming obsessed, saw him spending all his time with this strange, intense young man, saw him forgetting about the responsibilities he was supposed to be shouldering. Finally, Aberforth could take it no more. He confronted Albus and Gellert directly. The confrontation likely happened on a late summer afternoon in the Dumbledore home. Aberforth, blunt and angry, told them that their plans were insane. He pointed out the obvious problem they had been ignoring in their grand scheming. Ariana was in no condition to travel. She certainly could not be dragged across Europe on some dangerous crusade to find mythical objects and overthrow the established order. She needed stability, safety, familiar surroundings. Taking her on their adventure would likely kill her, or at the very least trigger catastrophic magical explosions that would expose everything they were trying to protect. Grindelwald did not take this intervention well. He saw Aberforth as an ignorant obstacle, a small-minded person who could not see the glorious future they were building. His reaction was swift and cruel. He drew his wand and cast the Cruciatus curse at Aberforth, one of the unforgivable curses, a spell that causes excruciating pain. In that moment, Albus was shocked out of his infatuation. Seeing Gellert torture his brother shattered whatever remaining illusions he had been clinging to. He drew his own wand to defend Aberforth, and suddenly the house erupted into chaos. A three-way duel broke out in the Dumbledore sitting room. Albus against Gellert against Aberforth. Wands flashing, spells colliding, furniture toppling. the very air crackling with magical energy. The noise and violence and raw magic in the air would have been terrifying to Ariana upstairs, triggering all her worst fears and traumas. Unable to control her response, her own magic began building inside her, pressure mounting unbearably. She either tried to intervene to stop her brothers from hurting each other, or she simply lost control entirely. Either way, she came downstairs into the chaos, and then, in the confusion of flashing spells and shouted curses, in the mayhem of 3 powerful young wizards unleashing magic with no restraint, Ariana was struck. A stray curse hit her, and she fell, just like that, the girl they were supposedly trying to protect. The sister whose suffering had been at the emotional heart of all their planning was dead at 14 years old. The duel stopped instantly. The room fell silent except for the sound of a settling dust and debris. Ariana's small form lay still on the floor, and nothing would ever be the same again. Grindelwald, realizing the magnitude of what had happened, fled immediately. He grabbed what belongings he could and left Godric's Hollow that very night, returning to continental Europe to begin what would become his dark rise to power. He left Albus and Aberforth standing over their sister's body, left them to deal with the consequences of a duel that had gone horribly, tragically wrong. But here is the terrible secret that would haunt Albus Dumbledore for the rest of his life. In the chaos of that 3-way duel, no one knew whose spell had actually killed Ariana. It might have been Grindelwald's curse. It might have been one of Aberforth's spells. Or, and this was the possibility that tormented Albus for decades, it might have been his own spell that struck her down. He never knew. He never found out. He would spend the rest of his very long life carrying the uncertainty, wondering if he had accidentally murdered his own sister while trying to defend his brother against the man he loved. The guilt was crushing and immediate. Everything Albus had wanted, everything he had schemed for with Grindelwald, had led directly to this moment. His ambition, his resentment of his duties, his infatuation with Gellert, his dreams of glory and power, all of it had culminated in the death of the person he was supposed to protect. Ariana's funeral, Aberforth's rage boiled over. He physically attacked Albus in front of all the mourners, breaking Albus's nose with his fist, openly blaming his brother for Ariana's death. The fracture between the 2 brothers would never fully heal. For the rest of their lives they would be distant and cold with each other, and Albus would accept Aberforth's anger and resentment as no more than he deserved. The summer of 1899 ended in blood and tragedy, and it fundamentally transformed Albus Dumbledore. The ambitious young man who had dreamed of glory and conquest died in that sitting room alongside his sister. What emerged from the wreckage was someone different. Someone who had learned in the harshest possible way what his own unchecked ambition could lead to. He had seen the monster he could become, and he vowed never to let it emerge again. From that point forward, Albus Dumbledore made a conscious decision to refuse positions of supreme power. When he was later offered the position of Minister for Magic, the highest political office in Wizarding Britain, he turned it down. Not once, but multiple times over the decades, he was approached about taking the post, and every single time he refused. He told people that he had learned he could not be trusted with power, that his judgment failed when temptation was too great. He believed, based on his experience with Grindelwald, that given enough power and the right circumstances, he would become a tyrant. However benevolent his intentions might seem at the start, so he chose a different path. He accepted a teaching position at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, becoming the Transfiguration Professor. Teaching allowed him to influence the future without ruling the present. He could shape young minds, guide the next generation, work to make the wizarding world better, without putting himself in a position where he could abuse authority. He threw himself into his work, collaborating with the famous alchemist Nicolas Flamel on various projects, including discovering 12 uses for dragon's blood, a contribution to magical knowledge that would later earn him a place on the famous Witches and Wizards cards that came with chocolate frogs. He became known as an eccentric but beloved teacher, someone who was brilliant yet approachable, powerful yet kind. But beneath the surface, beneath the twinkling eyes and the cheerful demeanor, the guilt and pain never really went away. For decades, Albus Dumbledore carried multiple secrets that he never shared with anyone. The truth about Ariana's condition and death, the nature of his relationship with Grindelwald, his uncertainty about who had cast the killing curse, his own temptation toward dark ideologies when he was young. These secrets became part of his fundamental nature, and he learned to live with them, the way one learns to live with old wounds that never quite heal. He visited Ariana's grave regularly, though he never spoke of these visits to anyone. He avoided his brother Aberforth, unable to face the living reminder of his greatest failure, and he watched from afar as Gellert Grindelwald began his rise to dark power in Europe. Throughout the 1920s and 1930s, Grindelwald built a following, gathering dark wizards to his cause, amassing power, slowly working toward the very revolution he and Albus had once planned together. He built a fortress prison called Normangard, where he inscribed the words for the greater good over the entrance, their old motto twisted into a justification for oppression and violence. Grindelwald's reign of terror spread across Europe, and the wizarding world looked to Albus Dumbledore, by now recognized as potentially the only wizard powerful enough to stop him. But Albus hesitated. Year after year he found reasons not to act. People called for him to confront Grindelwald, but he delayed. The reason for his delay was complex. Partly it was fear of what he might discover about Ariana's death. He dreaded that Grindelwald might know whose spell had killed her. He dreaded that confronting his old friend might force him to face a truth he could not bear. There was also the matter of the blood pact they had made, which magically prevented them from directly fighting each other, though this could potentially be broken. But perhaps most painful was the simple fact that some part of him still cared for Gellert Grindelwald, still remembered those golden summer days when they had been young and brilliant and full of hope together. Confronting Grindelwald meant destroying those memories completely, and acknowledging fully what he had almost become. It was not until 1945 when Grindelwald's atrocities had reached a point where they could no longer be ignored, when the death toll was unconscionable and the global wizarding war threatened to expose magic to the Muggle world entirely, that Albus Dumbledore finally acted. He sought out Grindelwald and challenged him to a duel. What followed was legendary, witnessed by several people and later described as the greatest duel between wizards in modern history. For hours, the two former friends battled, unleashing magic of breathtaking power and complexity. In the end, Albus emerged victorious. He defeated Grindelwald, won the Elder Wand from him, becoming the true master of that legendary artifact, and imprisoned his old love in Nurmengard, the very fortress Grindelwald had built for his enemies. It is worth noting that Albus did not kill Grindelwald. He could have, perhaps should have by the standards of war, but he chose imprisonment instead. Was this mercy? Lingering affection? Or did he believe that forcing Grindelwald to live with his crimes was a more fitting punishment than death? Whatever his reasoning, Grindelwald would remain imprisoned in Nurmengard for the next 53 years. And in a twist that reveals much about the complicated nature of their relationship, when Lord Voldemort came to murder Grindelwald in his cell in 1998, seeking information about the Elder Wand, Grindelwald refused to tell Voldemort where the wand was. He lied to Voldemort, protecting the secret of the wand's location even though he must have known this lie would cost him his life. Perhaps, in the end, some fragment of his old feelings for Albus remained. Or perhaps he simply could not bear to see Voldemort desecrate Dumbledore's tomb where the wand had been buried. Either way, Grindelwald took that secret to his grave. After 1945, Albus Dumbledore's reputation was transformed. The man who had defeated the darkest wizard of the age became a hero, celebrated and honored throughout the wizarding world. He was offered titles and positions. He became Chief Warlock of the Wizengamot, the highest judicial authority in Britain. He became Supreme Mugwump of the International Confederation of Wizards, effectively the leader of the global wizarding community. He was showered with accolades, but true to his vow, he never sought the ultimate political power, never tried to leverage his fame into becoming Minister for Magic. He continued teaching at Hogwarts, eventually becoming Deputy Headmaster under Armando Dippet. And then, in the late 1960s, he became Headmaster himself. It was during his early years as a professor that Albus Dumbledore encountered another boy who would shape the course of wizarding history. In 1938, he traveled to a London orphanage to meet a young Tom Riddle, an 11-year-old boy who had been identified as having magical ability and was due to attend Hogwarts. That first meeting was revelatory and disturbing in equal measure. Tom Riddle was clearly brilliant, magically powerful far beyond his years, but there was something wrong with him. Something cold and cruel that set off every alarm in Dumbledore's experienced mind. During their conversation, Dumbledore learned that young Tom had been using his magic to hurt other children, to steal their possessions, to torture animals. The boy showed no remorse, no empathy, only a calculating intelligence and a desire for power and control. As a test, Dumbledore set Tom's wardrobe on fire, with a carefully controlled magical flame that did no actual damage, and he watched the boy's reaction carefully. Tom's response confirmed Dumbledore's suspicions. This was not a normal child who had made mistakes. This was someone fundamentally broken, someone who took pleasure in the suffering of others. Nevertheless, Dumbledore brought Tom to Hogwarts, because every child deserves a chance at education. Every young wizard deserves to learn to control their abilities. But unlike other teachers, unlike Horace Slughorn, who would later be charmed by Tom Riddle's surface charisma, Dumbledore never trusted him. He kept a watchful eye on the boy throughout his school years. He suspected Tom was up to terrible things, and he was proven right when the Chamber of Secrets was opened in the 1940s, and a student died. Dumbledore caught Tom in a lie about that incident and managed to close the chamber, though he could not prove enough to have Tom expelled. Even as Tom became head boy, even as he graduated with top marks and the admiration of most of the school, Dumbledore never wavered in his vigilance. Years later, when Tom Riddle had transformed himself into Lord Voldemort and begun his campaign of terror, when he had created Horcruxes to achieve immortality and gathered an army of Death Eaters to his cause, Dumbledore was not surprised. He had seen the seeds of this darkness in that orphanage meeting, and he knew with a grim certainty that just as he had been the only one who would stop Grindelwald, he would be central to stopping Voldemort as well. The knowledge must have been exhausting, the realization that his entire life would be defined by confronting Dark Lords, that he would never be allowed to simply teach transfiguration in peace. When Voldemort's first rise to power began in earnest in the 1970s, Dumbledore took action. The Ministry of Magic was proven ineffective, riddled with spies and bureaucratic paralysis. So Dumbledore did what he had done before. He organized a resistance outside official channels. He founded the Order of the Phoenix, a secret society dedicated to fighting Voldemort and his Death Eaters through covert operations and intelligence gathering. He recruited Aurors, teachers, students, anyone willing to risk their lives for the cause. He became essentially the leader of an underground paramilitary organization, willing to operate outside the law when the law itself was failing. This role reveals much about Dumbledore's mindset. He would not seek official government power, would not try to control the ministry, but he had no qualms about pulling strings from the shadows, about organizing secret operations, about making strategic decisions that affected many lives. He had learned from his youth that he could not trust himself with open power, but he had also learned that sometimes action must be taken regardless of legality or official sanction. So he positioned himself as a puppet master, moving pieces on a board that only he could fully see, bearing the weight of command that required him to send people to their deaths for what he judged to be the greater good. Then, in early 1980, came the prophecy that would change everything. Dumbledore had been planning to scrap the divination teaching position at Hogwarts, viewing the subject as mostly fraudulent nonsense. But he agreed to interview one more candidate, Sybil Trelawney, great-great-granddaughter of the famous seer Cassandra Trelawney. The interview took place at the Hog's Head Inn in Hogsmeade, a somewhat seedy establishment owned, interestingly, by Albus's estranged brother, Aberforth. Why Dumbledore chose that location rather than Hogwarts itself is unclear. Perhaps he wanted privacy. Perhaps he was making some subtle gesture toward reconciliation with his brother by conducting business in Aberforth's establishment. During the interview, Sybil Trelawney seemed to confirm Dumbledore's low opinion of divination. She was vague, pretentious, clearly overestimating her abilities. He was preparing to politely end the interview when suddenly her entire manner changed. Her eyes rolled back, her voice became harsh and strange, and she fell into a genuine prophetic trance, the first real one Dumbledore had witnessed in decades. She spoke words that would echo through the coming years. The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches, born to those who have thrice defied him, born as the 7th month dies. and the Dark Lord will mark him as his equal. But he will have power the Dark Lord knows not, and either must die at the hand of the other, for neither can live while the other survives. Dumbledore sat frozen, recognizing immediately that he had just heard a genuine prophecy, a real glimpse of the future that could not be dismissed. This changed everything. The prophecy meant that somewhere a child was about to be born, a child who would have the power to defeat Voldemort. But it also meant that Voldemort would eventually learn of this prophecy and would hunt for that child, would try to kill them before they could grow into their destiny. What Dumbledore did not know, could not have known in that moment, was that the prophecy had been partially overheard. Outside the room, lurking and eavesdropping, was a young man named Severus Snape. Snape was at that time a Death Eater, loyal to Voldemort, looking for any information that might curry favor with his Dark Lord. He had been spying, trying to hear what was being discussed, when Trelawney fell into her trance. Aberforth caught Snape and threw him out of the pub, but not before Snape had heard the first part of the prophecy, the part about a child being born who would have the power to vanquish the Dark Lord. Snape rushed to Voldemort with this information, not realizing that he had not heard the full prophecy, not understanding the complete implications of what he was sharing. When Voldemort analyzed the partial prophecy, he determined that it referred to one of two children who would be born at the end of July 1980. Harry Potter, the son of James and Lily Potter, or Neville Longbottom, the son of Frank and Alice Longbottom. Both sets of parents had defied Voldemort 3 times. Both children would be born at the right time. Voldemort chose to focus on Harry Potter, partly because Harry was a half-blood like himself, and partly because of something that would prove crucial. He chose to mark Harry as his equal, thus fulfilling that portion of the prophecy himself. But then Severus Snape learned something that shattered his world. He realized that Voldemort was planning to kill Lily Potter. Lily Evans, the woman Snape had loved since childhood, his first friend, the girl who had shown him kindness when no one else had. She was Harry Potter's mother, and Voldemort intended to kill her along with her husband and son. Snape was consumed with panic and guilt. In his desperate attempt to serve Voldemort, he had set in motion the death of the only person he had ever truly loved. Snape went to Dumbledore. On a windswept hilltop, the Death Eater and the Headmaster met in secret. Snape begged Dumbledore to hide Lily Potter, to protect her from Voldemort. And here we see Dumbledore's manipulative brilliance at its sharpest. He was disgusted by Snape's selfishness, by the fact that Snape only cared about saving Lily, not her husband or infant son. But Dumbledore saw an opportunity. He saw a potentially invaluable asset, a Death Eater close to Voldemort who could be turned, who would provide intelligence and act as a double agent. So he agreed to try to hide the Potters, to keep them safe, but he demanded a price for his protection. He asked Severus Snape what he would give in return, and Snape, desperate and terrified, answered anything. That single word sealed Snape's fate. Dumbledore had him. From that moment forward, Severus Snape belonged to Albus Dumbledore, bound by a promise that could never be taken back. The Potters went into hiding under the Fidelius Charm, one of the most powerful protective enchantments in existence. Their location would be hidden inside the soul of a secret keeper. And as long as that person did not reveal the secret, the Potters would be safe. they chose Peter Pettigrew as their secret keeper. A catastrophic misjudgment that Dumbledore, despite his intelligence, did not catch. He trusted the Potters to know their friends, and they trusted the wrong person. On Halloween night, 1981, Peter Pettigrew betrayed the Potters. He revealed their location to Voldemort. The Dark Lord went to their house in Godric's Hollow, killed James Potter, and then turned his wand on Lily. She died protecting her infant son, pleading for Harry's life, offering herself in his place. When Voldemort then tried to kill Harry, something unprecedented happened. Lily's sacrifice, her pure love given freely to protect her child, created a magical protection so powerful that Voldemort's killing curse rebounded. The curse struck Voldemort instead, destroying his body, reducing him to less than a ghost, a barely alive fragment of soul that fled into the wilderness. The Dark Lord was gone, defeated not by an army or a great wizard, but by a mother's love and an infant boy. Harry Potter survived with only a lightning bolt scar on his forehead. He became instantly famous throughout the wizarding world as the boy who lived, the child who had somehow vanquished the greatest dark wizard of the age. The wizarding community erupted in celebration. People danced in the streets, sent up fireworks, rejoiced that their long nightmare was over, but Albus Dumbledore, arriving at the scene in Godric's Hollow to find James and Lily dead and Harry alive, did not celebrate. He mourned, both for the lives lost and for the choices he now had to make. Severus Snape came to Dumbledore in the aftermath, suicidal with grief. The woman he loved was dead, killed despite Dumbledore's promise to protect her. And it was Snape's own fault for revealing the prophecy in the first place. Dumbledore, rather than offering comfort, used Snape's grief and guilt ruthlessly. He told Snape that if he wanted Lily's death to have meaning, if he wanted to honor her sacrifice, he had to protect her son. He had to devote the rest of his life to keeping Harry Potter safe. He manipulated Snape's emotions expertly, binding the man to a lifetime of service through guilt and the promise of redemption that would never fully come. Then Dumbledore made one of his most controversial decisions. He took baby Harry to the home of Lily's sister, Petunia Dursley, and her family in Little Whinging, Surrey. Minerva McGonagall, his deputy headmistress, was horrified. She had been watching the Dursley family all day, and she warned Dumbledore that these were the worst sort of muggles imaginable, that they were small-minded, cruel, and petty, that they hated anything unusual or magical. Dumbledore listened to her concerns and dismissed them. He had already made his decision. His reasoning was multifaceted. First, there was the practical matter of magical protection. By sending Harry to live with his mother's blood relative, Dumbledore invoked a powerful protective charm based on Lily's sacrifice. As long as Harry called the place where his mother's blood dwelled home, as long as he lived under Petunia Dursley's roof, Voldemort would not be able to touch him there. This was not mere sentiment, it was concrete magical protection that would keep Harry safe from Voldemort's followers during his most vulnerable years. But there was also a psychological calculation at work. Dumbledore believed that growing up famous would ruin Harry, that being raised as the boy who lived, celebrated and fawned over by the entire wizarding community, would turn him into a spoiled, arrogant person incapable of the selflessness that would ultimately be required of him. So he deliberately chose to have Harry raised away from the wizarding world in ignorance of his fame in circumstances that would keep him humble. That these circumstances would also be cruel and abusive was something Dumbledore acknowledged and accepted as the price of his plan. Dumbledore did arrange for some minimal oversight. He had Arabella Figg, a squib, move to Little Whinging to keep an eye on Harry from a distance, to report if anything went truly catastrophically wrong. But he never visited Harry himself. He never checked in personally. He allowed the Dursleys to tell Harry that his parents died in a car crash, to raise him in a cupboard under the stairs, to treat him as an unwanted burden, to bully and neglect him for 10 years. Dumbledore permitted all of this because he judged it necessary for Harry's survival and character development. Some would call this a monstrous betrayal, condemning an innocent child to years of emotional abuse. Others would argue it was a necessary evil, that the magical protection and the character forged through adversity were worth the cost. Dumbledore himself, years later, would admit to Harry that he might have been too cautious, that he might have shielded Harry more than was strictly necessary, but in the moment, in the aftermath of Voldemort's first fall, he made the choices he thought would give Harry the best chance of surviving when Voldemort inevitably returned. And so Harry Potter grew up in the Muggle world, knowing nothing of his fame, nothing of the prophecy hanging over his head, nothing of the magical heritage that was his birthright. He grew up believing himself unwanted and unexceptional, while the entire wizarding world celebrated him as a hero. This lie of omission, this deception on a grand scale, was what Dumbledore judged best. It was classic Dumbledore, using secrets and careful manipulation to shape events toward his desired outcome, always believing that he alone could see the full picture, that the burden of knowing was his to bear alone. The 1980s passed quietly for Dumbledore. He served as Headmaster of Hogwarts, continued his various political positions, and privately prepared for what he increasingly believed was inevitable: Voldemort's return. He had studied enough dark magic, understood enough about magical theory, to suspect that Voldemort had not truly died. A killing curse backfiring should not have left a barely alive wraith. It should have killed him completely, which meant Voldemort must have done something to anchor himself to life, something dark and terrible that Dumbledore could only speculate about. It was during Harry's second year at Hogwarts, when Tom Riddle's old diary surfaced and was revealed to contain a piece of Voldemort's soul, that Dumbledore's suspicions crystallized into certainty. Horcruxes. Voldemort had created Horcruxes, objects containing fragments of his soul that would tether him to life even if his body was destroyed. It was the darkest of dark magic, requiring murder to split the soul, and Voldemort had apparently done it multiple times. Dumbledore began to quietly research, trying to determine how many Horcruxes Voldemort had made, where they might be, how they could be destroyed. This investigation would consume the last years of his life, but before we reach that final chapter, we must explore Harry's years at Hogwarts under Dumbledore's watchful eye, because this is where many of Dumbledore's most subtle manipulations took place, where the preparation of Harry Potter as both weapon and sacrifice proceeded with careful precision. When Harry Potter arrived at Hogwarts in September 1991, Albus Dumbledore greeted him warmly with twinkling eyes and gentle humor, playing the part of the benevolent grandfather figure perfectly. But from the very start, Dumbledore was testing Harry, observing him. gathering data about his character and capabilities. The entire first year can be seen as an extended evaluation of whether Harry Potter would become the hero Dumbledore needed him to be. Consider the obstacles protecting the Philosopher's Stone that first year. Dumbledore and his staff had created a series of challenges to guard this legendary artifact that could produce the elixir of life. There was Fluffy the three-headed dog, Devil's Snare, flying keys, a giant chess set, a logic puzzle involving potions, and finally the Mirror of Erised. These challenges were supposedly impregnable, designed to stop anyone who might try to steal the stone. And yet 3 first-year students managed to get through them all in one night. Some observers have noted that the obstacles seemed almost tailored to the specific skills of Harry, Ron, and Hermione. Ron was a chess genius, and the chess challenge required exactly that. Hermione was brilliant with logic and knowledge of plants, which got them past the Devil's Snare and the potion puzzle. Harry's flying skills helped with the keys, and his pure heart allowed him to obtain the stone from the mirror. Were these coincidences? Or did Dumbledore design challenges that his students could overcome if they were brave and clever enough? Was he testing Harry, seeing if the boy had the courage and character needed for what was to come? The Mirror of Erised itself was Dumbledore's own contribution to the defenses, and it was brilliantly effective. Only someone who wanted to find the stone but not use it would be able to retrieve it from the mirror. This ensured that Quirrell, possessed by Voldemort's fragmented soul, could never get the stone no matter how hard he tried. But it also meant that Harry, pure of heart and only wanting to protect the stone, could claim it. Some have speculated that Dumbledore actually wanted Harry to face Quirrell and Voldemort that night. That he set up the situation knowing that Harry would try to be a hero. That he used the entire incident as a test of Harry's character and courage. Whether or not that specific theory is true, what is certain is that Dumbledore allowed Harry and his friends to take significant risks that year. He could have stopped them at any point, could have intervened more directly, but he chose not to. After the incident, when Harry woke up in the hospital wing after his confrontation with Quirrell Voldemort, Dumbledore visited him. They had a gentle conversation where Dumbledore answered some of Harry's questions, though notably not all of them. And when Harry asked Dumbledore what he saw when he looked into the Mirror of Erised, Dumbledore told a lie. He claimed with his characteristic twinkle that he saw himself holding a pair of thick woolen socks that one could never have. Enough socks, and that he never got any for Christmas. It was a charming, whimsical answer, the kind of thing the eccentric Dumbledore would say. Harry suspected it might not be the full truth, but he accepted it with a smile. But it was indeed a lie. Years later, it would be confirmed that when Dumbledore looked into the Mirror of Erised, which shows the deepest desire of one's heart, he saw his family. He saw his father Percival, his mother Kendra, his brother Aberforth, and his sister Ariana, all alive and whole, all together and happy. He saw the family that his mistakes had destroyed, the people he had lost through tragedy and his own poor judgment. That was his heart's deepest desire, and it remained his heart's deepest desire until the day he died. But he did not tell this to Harry. He deflected with humor and whimsy, keeping his pain private, maintaining the facade of the wise, unburdened headmaster. This small lie is emblematic of Dumbledore's approach throughout Harry's time at school. He would be kind, he would be helpful, he would offer guidance and support, but he would keep his own suffering hidden, would maintain careful boundaries between himself and Harry, would reveal only what he judged Harry needed to know at any given moment. Through Harry's second, third, and fourth years, this pattern continued. Dumbledore remained a benevolent presence in the background, intervening when absolutely necessary but otherwise allowing Harry to face challenges, to grow through adversity, to develop the skills and character he would eventually need. When the Chamber of Secrets was opened and students were being attacked, Dumbledore was temporarily removed from the school by the Board of Governors. But he sent Fawkes his Phoenix to help Harry in the final confrontation. After Harry destroyed Tom Riddle's diary, unknowingly destroying one of Voldemort's Horcruxes, Dumbledore comforted Harry about his concerns regarding the Parseltongue ability and his strange connection to Voldemort. It was in that moment, listening to Harry describe how the diary had contained a piece of Voldemort's soul, that Dumbledore must have fully confirmed his theory about Horcruxes. And it was likely in that moment, or soon after that, he realized something even more terrible. Harry Potter himself was a Horcrux, carrying a fragment of Voldemort's soul inside his scar. The night Voldemort's killing curse rebounded, when Voldemort's soul was violently ripped from his body, a piece of it had latched onto the only living thing in the room, baby Harry. This explained Harry's connection to Voldemort, his ability to speak Parseltongue, the dreams and visions he sometimes had. But Dumbledore did not tell Harry this. Not then. Not for many years. He told Harry only that the scar connected them, that Harry had absorbed some of Voldemort's power, which was technically true but far from the complete picture. Why? Because telling Harry that he carried a piece of Voldemort's soul would be telling Harry that he, Harry, was one of the very things that had to be destroyed for Voldemort to be killed. It would be telling a 12-year-old child that he would eventually have to die. Dumbledore was not yet ready to burden Harry with that knowledge, not when there was still so much development, so much character building, so much mental and emotional strengthening that needed to happen first. During Harry's third year, when Sirius Black escaped from Azkaban, and the truth about Peter Pettigrew's betrayal came to light, Dumbledore orchestrated another subtle manipulation. He instructed Harry and Hermione to use Hermione's time turner to go back and save both Sirius and Buckbeak, the hippogriff, from unjust deaths. He gave them cryptic hints, trusting them to understand what needed to be done, and they succeeded. Dumbledore enabled an illegal prison break and the theft of a condemned animal, all while maintaining plausible deniability. He could claim, if questioned, that he had simply made a vague suggestion to two students, and whatever they chose to do with the time turner that Hermione already possessed was their decision. Meanwhile, an innocent man was saved and a valuable ally was preserved for the future. Harry's fourth year brought unexpected complications. Dumbledore had not wanted Harry to compete in the Triwizard Tournament, a dangerous competition between three wizarding schools that hadn't been held for over a century. When Harry's name came out of the Goblet of Fire despite Dumbledore's age-line protection, despite Harry being too young to enter, Dumbledore was immediately suspicious. He knew someone must have entered Harry's name, must have been manipulating events, but he could not immediately determine who or why. The binding magical contract created by the goblet forced Harry to compete, and Dumbledore could only watch anxiously as Harry faced dragons, mere people, and a deadly maze. When Harry disappeared during the final task and then returned carrying Cedric Diggory's body, crying about Voldemort having returned, Dumbledore believed him instantly. He saw the truth in Harry's eyes, recognized the trauma of someone who had witnessed terrible things. While others, like Cornelius Fudge, the Minister for Magic, denied the possibility that Voldemort was back, Dumbledore accepted it without question. He immediately began taking action, sending trusted members of the Order to their old posts, preparing for the war he knew was coming. And crucially, he chose to tell the students and the wizarding community the truth that Voldemort had returned, and that Cedric Diggory had been murdered. This decision to speak the truth openly was unusual for Dumbledore, and it cost him politically. Fudge and the Ministry launched a smear campaign against him, painting him as a senile old man clinging to power through fear-mongering. The Daily Prophet ran articles mocking him. His political positions were threatened, but Dumbledore bore this public humiliation without complaint, focused entirely on the larger goal of preparing for the war with Voldemort. Behind the scenes, Dumbledore reformed the Order of the Phoenix within hours of Voldemort's return. He gathered his old allies and recruited new members, including Harry's friends, creating a network of resistance fighters who would operate outside official Ministry channels. He kept the Order's activities secret from Harry at first, despite Harry being at the center of everything, despite the fact that Voldemort was now actively targeting Harry. This decision to keep Harry in the dark about the Order's activities was the beginning of Dumbledore's most controversial strategy. During Harry's 5th year, Dumbledore made a deliberate choice to distance himself from Harry emotionally and physically. He barely spoke to Harry all year, avoided making eye contact with him, kept their interactions minimal and cold. To Harry, who had come to see Dumbledore as a mentor and protector, this sudden abandonment was bewildering and hurtful. Harry felt isolated, angry, confused about why the one person he thought he could count on seemed to be ignoring him. The distance between them created a void that Voldemort, through their mental connection, was able to exploit. Dumbledore's reasoning, which he later explained, was that he feared Voldemort might possess Harry, or use their connection to spy on Dumbledore through Harry's eyes. By staying away from Harry, by not letting Harry see his plans or strategies, Dumbledore hoped to keep crucial information secure. He also wanted to prevent the possibility of Voldemort luring him into a trap by threatening Harry. But this strategy, born of tactical thinking and fear, backfired spectacularly. The emotional isolation left Harry vulnerable in different ways. When Voldemort planted a vision in Harry's mind of Sirius Black being tortured in the Department of Mysteries at the Ministry of Magic, Harry, feeling he had no one to turn to, and desperate to save his godfather, rushed off to London with his friends. The resulting battle at the Ministry was catastrophic. Death Eaters were waiting for them. It had been a trap all along. The prophecy record was destroyed in the fighting, several students were injured, and most devastatingly, Sirius Black died, killed by his cousin Bellatrix Lestrange. Harry was forced to watch his godfather fall through the ancient veil in the death chamber, disappearing forever. The grief and rage and guilt Harry felt were overwhelming, and when he finally confronted Dumbledore afterward, when he screamed and destroyed objects in Dumbledore's office and demanded answers, Dumbledore finally broke his silence. In what may have been the most honest conversation Dumbledore ever had with anyone, he admitted everything to Harry. He admitted that he had cared for Harry too much, that his affection for the boy had made him want to shield Harry from pain, that he had kept his distance all year to protect Harry from Voldemort, but in doing so had left Harry vulnerable in other ways. He admitted that if he had been more open earlier, if he had trusted Harry with more information, Sirius might still be alive. He revealed the full content of the prophecy, explaining why Voldemort had tried to kill Harry as a baby, why they were bound together in this deadly dance. He confessed that he had known Harry would have to face Voldemort eventually, that this had been ordained before Harry was even born, and that he had been preparing Harry for this confrontation while trying to allow Harry as much childhood and happiness as possible. It was a remarkable moment of vulnerability from a man who rarely showed such things. Dumbledore wept as he spoke. This powerful ancient wizard brought to tears by his own mistakes and by the weight of what he was asking of a 15-year-old boy. Harry, seeing Dumbledore's genuine remorse and pain, began to understand that his headmaster was not infallible, that Dumbledore was capable of errors and was tormented by them. That same year, Harry witnessed something else significant. He watched Dumbledore duel Lord Voldemort in the atrium of the Ministry of Magic, the only time in the original story that these two legendary wizards faced each other directly in combat. The duel was spectacular, reality-bending magic that went far beyond normal wizarding capability. Dumbledore, calm and controlled, countered Voldemort's lethal attacks with transfiguration and elemental magic, turning statues into shields, conjuring ropes of fire, manipulating water, all while protecting Harry and himself. Voldemort, one of the most powerful dark wizards in history, could not gain an advantage. In the end, he attempted to possess Harry, hoping to force Dumbledore to kill them both. But Harry's capacity for love drove Voldemort out. Voldemort fled, and witnesses from the Ministry finally confirmed what Dumbledore and Harry had been saying. The Dark Lord had indeed returned. Now we come to Dumbledore's final year, his last moves in the long game he had been playing for decades. And these moves were perhaps his most morally complex. During the summer before Harry's 6th year, Dumbledore went searching for Horcruxes. He had spent months researching, investigating Voldemort's past, and he believed he had identified some of the objects Voldemort had used to store pieces of his soul. One of these was Marvolo Gaunt's ring, a ring that had belonged to Voldemort's maternal grandfather and which now sat in the ruins of the Gaunt family shack. Dumbledore found the ring and destroyed the Horcrux within it, but not before making a fatal mistake. The ring stone was the Resurrection Stone, one of the 3 Deathly Hallows, overcome by the desire to see his family again, to apologize to his mother and sister, to seek forgiveness from the dead. Dumbledore forgot caution. He put the ring on his finger. The ring had been cursed by Voldemort with a powerful, deadly curse designed to kill anyone who tried to wear it. The curse activated immediately, spreading through Dumbledore's hand and up his arm, a withering death that could not be stopped, only slowed. Severus Snape, who was skilled in dark magic and healing, managed to contain the curse to Dumbledore's hand and lower arm, buying time, but even he could only delay the inevitable. Dumbledore had perhaps a year to live, maybe less. The greatest wizard of the age was dying, killed by his own moment of weakness, his own desperate longing for a family he could never have back. Faced with his mortality and with limited time, Dumbledore made his final plans with cold, tactical precision. First, he enlisted Harry as his partner in hunting the remaining Horcruxes. He began giving Harry private lessons in his office, using his pensieve to show Harry memories of Voldemort's past. They explored Tom Riddle's childhood, his years at Hogwarts, his descent into darkness, his research into Horcruxes. Dumbledore guided Harry to understand what the Horcruxes were, how many Voldemort had likely made, what objects they might be. He was preparing Harry to continue the mission after Dumbledore's death, though Harry did not yet know that death was imminent. But crucially, significantly, Dumbledore never told Harry the complete truth. He never told Harry that he himself was a Horcrux, that a piece of Voldemort's soul lived inside Harry's scar, and that this piece would have to be destroyed for Voldemort to become mortal. He kept this devastating truth hidden, this knowledge that Harry would eventually have to die for the mission to succeed. Why? Because Dumbledore needed Harry to be willing to face death when the time came, to walk calmly to his own sacrifice, and he judged that this would only be possible if Harry did not spend years dreading it, if Harry believed until the crucial moment that he could survive and have a future. Severus Snape discovered this plan and was horrified. In a heated confrontation, Snape accused Dumbledore of raising Harry like a pig for slaughter, of keeping the boy alive only so he could die at the proper moment to serve Dumbledore's strategy. It was a brutal but accurate assessment. Dumbledore had manipulated Harry's entire life toward this single purpose: to destroy the Horcrux within himself by willingly accepting death from Voldemort. Dumbledore's only defense was a cold pragmatism, an acknowledgement that war requires terrible sacrifices, that he had watched many people die over his long life, and Harry was simply one more necessary casualty. Except, and this is crucial to understanding Dumbledore's final gambit, he had also discovered a potential loophole. Back in Harry's 4th year, when Voldemort had used Harry's blood in his resurrection ritual, when he had taken Lily's blood protection into his own body, Dumbledore had seen something. There had been that momentary gleam of something like triumph in his eyes that Harry had noticed. Dumbledore realized that by taking Harry's blood, Voldemort had essentially tethered Harry to life. As long as Voldemort lived with Harry's blood in his veins, as long as that blood protection existed in Voldemort, Harry could not truly die. If Voldemort struck Harry with a killing curse, it would destroy the Horcrux but leave Harry's soul intact, able to return to his body. This was Dumbledore's great hope, the possibility that allowed him to sleep at night despite what he was asking Harry to do. He believed Harry could sacrifice himself, destroy the Horcrux, and yet survive, but he could not be certain. It was a theory, educated speculation based on his deep understanding of magic, but not guaranteed. And he never shared this theory with Harry. He needed Harry to go to his death, believing it was truly the end, because only a genuine accepted sacrifice would trigger the same protective magic that Lily's death had created. Harry had to choose death freely, willingly, without reservation, just as his mother had. Dumbledore also arranged his own death with the same calculated precision. He approached Severus Snape with a terrible request. Voldemort had ordered Draco Malfoy to kill Dumbledore as punishment for Draco's father's failures. essentially giving the 16-year-old boy an impossible task that would likely result in Draco's own death or corruption. Dumbledore wanted to save Draco from having to commit murder and split his soul. He was also dying anyway from the curse, facing a painful, inevitable death. And he saw strategic advantages in having Snape be the one to kill him. It would cement Snape's position as Voldemort's most trusted servant, allowing Snape to become headmaster of Hogwarts and protect the students during the dark times ahead. There was also the matter of the Elder Wand. Dumbledore possessed this legendary wand, the most powerful wand in existence, and he knew Voldemort would eventually come seeking it. Dumbledore's plan was that if he died by mutual agreement, if Snape killed him as a mercy rather than in true combat, the Elder Wand's power would die with him, and Voldemort would be unable to claim it. It was a complex plan with multiple objectives, and it required Severus Snape to agree to commit cold-blooded murder, to kill the one person who had shown him trust and given his life meaning after Lily's death. Snape, bound by his old promise of anything, bound by his continuing guilt and his twisted, enduring love for Lily Potter, agreed. And so Dumbledore's death was scheduled, planned like a military operation, kept secret from everyone else, including Harry. During that 6th year, Dumbledore took Harry on one mission to retrieve what they thought was another Horcrux, Salazar Slytherin's locket, hidden in a seaside cave behind deadly protections. To get to the locket, Dumbledore had to drink a basin of poison that forced him to relive his worst memories, his most profound fears and regrets. As Harry watched in horror, forcing the poison down Dumbledore's throat spoonful by spoonful because Dumbledore himself had ordered him to, the great wizard regressed into a terrified, broken state. He screamed and begged, "Don't hurt them, please kill me instead." He was reliving the night of Ariana's death, back in that sitting room in Godric's Hollow, watching Grindelwald torture Aberforth, watching the duel spiral out of control, watching his sister die. Even decades later, even after a century of trying to atone, the guilt and trauma were still there, fresh enough to destroy him under the poison's influence. It was perhaps the only time anyone other than Grindelwald had seen Dumbledore truly vulnerable, truly shattered, and it revealed that beneath all the strategy and manipulation and careful control, he was still that broken young man who had lost everything that mattered. They retrieved the locket, though it later turned out to be a fake, a substitute left by someone else who had gotten there first. They returned to Hogwarts, Dumbledore weakened and exhausted. And that very night, Death Eaters attacked the school, led in by Draco Malfoy, who had been working all year on ways to kill Dumbledore. On top of the astronomy tower, Dumbledore was cornered. Draco disarmed him, taking his wand, but couldn't bring himself to cast the killing curse. Dumbledore tried to talk Draco down, tried to save the boy's soul even in what would be Dumbledore's final moments. Then, Snape arrived. Dumbledore looked at him and said simply, "Severus, please." To everyone watching, it sounded like a plea for mercy, a great man begging for his life. In reality, it was Dumbledore reminding Snape of their agreement, asking him to fulfill his promise. Snape, his face full of hatred and revulsion, cast the Avada Kedavra curse. Dumbledore died and fell from the tower, and the greatest wizard of the age was gone. The wizarding world went into mourning. Dumbledore's funeral was attended by hundreds, with tributes from across the globe. But the full truth of his death the plan he had arranged with Snape remained hidden. To the Order of the Phoenix, to Harry and his friends, it appeared that Snape had betrayed them all, that the man Dumbledore had trusted was actually Voldemort's servant. Only two people knew the truth: the dead Dumbledore and the very much alive Severus Snape, who now had to play the role of villain perfectly, while continuing to work toward Dumbledore's goals. After Dumbledore's death, Harry found himself questioning everything he thought he knew about his mentor. The publication of Rita Skeeter's book, The Life and Lies of Albus Dumbledore, exposed many secrets that Dumbledore had never shared. The world learned about his friendship with Grindelwald, about their youthful plans for wizard domination, about the motto for the greater good that they had embraced. They learned about the tragedy of Ariana's death and the broken Dumbledore family. Skeeter painted Dumbledore as a power-hungry manipulator who had simply hidden his ambitions behind a grandfatherly facade. For Harry, already grieving and now given the monumental task of finding and destroying the remaining Horcruxes with minimal guidance, these revelations were devastating. Had Dumbledore ever really cared about him? Had everything been manipulation? Was the man he admired actually a hypocrite who had once believed the same dark ideology as Voldemort? Harry's faith in Dumbledore cracked, and for a time, he wasn't sure he could trust anything Dumbledore had told him. The truth, as Harry would eventually learn, was more complex than either blind faith or complete cynicism could capture. Yes, Dumbledore had been manipulative. Yes, he had kept secrets and told lies. Yes, he had guided Harry's life toward a specific end without giving Harry full knowledge or choice in the matter. But he had also genuinely cared for Harry. He had tried to give Harry as much happiness and normalcy as possible given the circumstances. He had agonized over the choices he made, had wept over the sacrifices required, had carried the weight of his decisions like stones in his heart. When Harry finally walked into the Forbidden Forest to surrender himself to Voldemort, believing he was going to his death to save his friends, he used the resurrection stone from the snitch Dumbledore had left him in his will. The stone brought back shades of his parents, Sirius and Remus Lupin, who walked with him and gave him courage. Then Voldemort struck him with the killing curse. But instead of dying, Harry found himself in a strange liminal space. A place between life and death that appeared as a bright, misty version of King's Cross Station. And there, in that in-between place, was Albus Dumbledore. Not the commanding, twinkling-eyed headmaster, but a smaller, more vulnerable version of himself. They talked, really talked, perhaps for the first time with complete honesty. Dumbledore admitted everything. He admitted his youthful arrogance with Grindelwald, his temptation by the Deathly Hallows, his failure to prioritize Ariana, his fear of confronting Grindelwald for so many years because he dreaded learning the truth about who had killed his sister. He admitted that he had been manipulating Harry all along, preparing him for sacrifice, and he begged for forgiveness. He explained the complete plan, including the theory about why Harry had survived, why Voldemort taking Harry's blood had created a tether to life. He acknowledged that he had been gambling with Harry's life based on magical theory, that he had not been certain it would work, that he had sent Harry to what he believed might be his death. And he wept, this ancient, powerful wizard reduced to tears by his own choices and their terrible costs. Harry, who had every right to be angry, who could have condemned Dumbledore for everything he had done, instead offered understanding. He recognized that Dumbledore had been trapped by circumstances, had done what he believed necessary with the information and options he had, and had suffered for those choices every day. They also discussed the Deathly Hallows, and Dumbledore admitted that he had been the most unworthy master of the Hallows imaginable. He had sought them for selfish reasons when he was young, and even though he had eventually possessed all three, he had learned that the quest for them was a trap, a distraction from what really mattered. The true master of death, he told Harry, was not someone who conquered death through magical objects, but someone who accepted death as a natural part of life. Harry, by willingly walking to his own death to save others, had proven himself worthier than Dumbledore could ever be. This conversation in King's Cross was Dumbledore's final gift to Harry. Not manipulation, not strategy, but an honest confession and genuine emotion. It allowed Harry to go back to life, to return to his body and face Voldemort one more time, with clarity and purpose. And it provided a kind of absolution for both of them. Harry forgave Dumbledore for his secrets and lies, understanding that they came from a place of terrible experience and genuine care. And Dumbledore, in death, finally laid down the burden of his guilt, finally allowed himself to be seen completely, flaws and failures and all. After Voldemort's final defeat, after the war was won and peace returned to the wizarding world, Harry named his second son Albus Severus Potter, honoring the two complicated, flawed men who had shaped his life through their secrets and sacrifices. It was an acknowledgement that people are complex, that heroes can have terrible faults, that love and manipulation can coexist in the same heart, and that sometimes the greatest acts of courage involve living with the weight of impossible choices. In the years that followed, as stories about Dumbledore continued to circulate, as historians debated his legacy and morality, a more complete picture emerged. He was neither saint nor villain, but something more interesting and more human. He was a man who learned in the cruelest possible way not to trust himself with power, so he wielded influence from the shadows instead. He was a man who kept secrets because he believed, rightly or wrongly, that he alone could see the full picture, and that sharing certain truths would cause more harm than good. He was a man who loved deeply but rarely allowed himself close personal connections, because everyone he had loved in his youth had died or been destroyed. He was a strategic genius who could play multi-dimensional chess with people's lives, who could manipulate events across decades, who could inspire loyalty and guide armies from behind the scenes. But he was also a teacher who genuinely cared about his students, who saw potential in unlikely people, who gave second chances and sometimes third and fourth chances to those who others had written off. He was the defeater of two Dark Lords, but also the man who kept lemon drops in his pocket for visiting students, who made terrible jokes at feast speeches, who wore ridiculous robes covered in stars and moons. His greatest flaw was perhaps his belief that he had to carry every burden alone, that only he could make the hard choices, that protecting others meant keeping them in the dark. This isolation, born from guilt and fear and perhaps an underlying arrogance that never fully left him, led to many of his mistakes. If he had trusted others more, if he had shared information more freely, if he had allowed for collaboration rather than manipulation, some tragedies might have been prevented. But it's also true that his complex strategies, his careful orchestrations, his willingness to make terrible choices, ultimately contributed to saving the wizarding world twice over. There's a particular poignant detail about Dumbledore that was revealed after his death. Something that shows both his power and his vulnerability. His boggart, the creature that transforms into a person's worst fear, would have taken the form of Ariana's corpse. Despite all his accomplishments, despite defeating Grindelwald and guiding the defeat of Voldemort, despite his brilliance and power and influence, his greatest fear remained the same as it had been since he was 18 years old. Confronting his dead sister, facing the physical reality of his greatest failure. For over a century, that fear never left him. The guilt never eased enough to be replaced by some other anxiety. He carried that trauma until his final breath. This is perhaps the key to understanding Dumbledore's secrets and lies. They were not the machinations of an evil mastermind or a heartless manipulator. They were the defense mechanisms of a deeply traumatized person who had learned that love could be blinding, that power could corrupt, that honesty could destroy, and that sometimes keeping secrets was the only way to protect the people who depended on you. Were all his choices right? No, clearly not. He made mistakes, caused suffering, underestimated emotional needs, while overestimating strategic necessities. But did he act with genuine care for the greater good, shaped by the hard lessons of his own failures? Yes, that too is true. In the portrait that hangs in the Headmaster's office at Hogwarts, Dumbledore sleeps more often than he wakes, perhaps finding in paint and canvas the peace that eluded him in life. But when he does open his painted eyes, when he offers advice to new headmasters or troubled students who seek wisdom, he does so with the accumulated understanding of over 150 years of life and whatever comes after. He has nothing left to hide, no more secrets to keep, no more elaborate plans to unfold. He can simply be Albus Dumbledore, flawed and brilliant, kind and manipulative, loving and distant, wise and foolish, all at once. There's a final conversation worth imagining, though it never appears in any record. What did Dumbledore and Snape's portraits say to each other in that office after the war ended, after all the secrets were finally revealed, after Harry had told the full story? Two men who had spent years lying to everyone, including each other, who had played their roles in Dumbledore's grand design, who had both loved unwisely and lost terribly, who had devoted their lives to protecting a boy neither could allow themselves to truly connect with. Perhaps they said nothing. Perhaps Snape's portrait refused to speak to Dumbledore's, maintaining the anger and resentment even in death. Or perhaps, freed from the burden of their missions, they finally acknowledged each other as fellow travelers through darkness, two damaged souls who had tried, in their imperfect ways, to create light. The legacy Albus Dumbledore left behind is complicated, and will probably be debated for generations. He saved countless lives through his actions, but also caused suffering through his manipulations. He defeated terrible evil, but also flirted with it in his youth. He inspired devotion, but also kept people at arm's length. He championed love as the greatest magic, but rarely allowed himself to fully experience it after his traumatic losses. He preached choice and free will while carefully orchestrating events to nudge people toward specific decisions. He was, in short, profoundly human. Despite his extraordinary magical abilities, despite his legendary status, despite the pedestal history tried to place him on. And maybe that's the real lesson of Dumbledore's secrets and lies. That even the wisest among us carry hidden wounds, that even the most powerful must sometimes operate from a place of fear and pain, that everyone is shaped by their traumas and losses in ways both visible and invisible, that the difference between a hero and a villain is sometimes just a matter of which path they chose after their world fell apart, and that choosing the harder right over the easier wrong doesn't mean the choices stop being agonizingly difficult. As you drift towards sleep, consider this final image. A portrait in a frame hanging in an office at a school where children learn magic. In the portrait, an old man with a long silver beard and half-moon spectacles sits in a chair, occasionally opening his eyes to observe the world that continues without him. He watches young witches and wizards grow and learn, watches them make their own mistakes and victories, watches the cycle of life continue, and perhaps, just perhaps, there's the faintest smile on his painted face, a sense of peace that eluded him in life, a recognition that for all his secrets and lies, for all his manipulations and mistakes, the world did go on, did get better, did find its way to light. The story of Albus Dumbledore is finally complete. All secrets revealed, all lies exposed to the light of truth. And in the end, he was neither the saint his admirers believed, nor the villain his detractors claimed. He was simply a person extraordinarily gifted but fundamentally flawed, who tried his best with the impossible situations life gave him and lived with the consequences of his choices until the very end. Rest now, knowing that even the greatest wizards were once confused, hurting people, trying to make sense of an often senseless world, doing what they thought was right even when they weren't entirely sure what right meant anymore. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the secrets and lies of Albus Dumbledore, please consider subscribing to this channel for more explorations of Harry Potter lore and other magical deep dives. Give this video a like if it helped you understand this complex character better, and leave a comment sharing your own thoughts on Dumbledore's morality and choices. Was he ultimately a force for good despite his manipulation? Or did his lies and secrets cause more harm than his actions prevented? The discussion continues, as all great debates about complex characters should. Until next time, may your dreams be peaceful and your secrets, if you must keep them, weigh lightly on your heart. Good night.